Welcome to today's episode of the Site Report. We're so lucky to be joined by Ken and John, two jet grouting gurus, as I like to call them, who are going to deep dive into their backgrounds, talk all about jet grouting, how they got their careers started, all the traveling that they've done, and then how the industry has changed since they first started at Keller. John and Ken, thank you both for joining me today. I know you have both been with Keller for a fairly good amount of time. I'm sure you have a ton of stories and a ton of experience to share with our listeners today. And it's pretty interesting too that you both started around the same time. So I really would like to start there, maybe with you, John. Just talk a little bit about what you did before coming to Keller, and then how you started at Keller in the jet grouting business.
In my previous life, I worked in the oil patch for 18 to 19 years. I worked for the big three, you might say, Dowell, Halliburton, Schlumberger, and Nalsco
Mhm.
Well Services. During that time, I become very versed in the pumping process of pumping grout at high pressures.
Mhm.
However, it was pumping it into a well, not into the ground, making a jet grout column. So I've done that for about 18 years. And in 1995, Keller approached the company I was working with, Nalsco Well Services in Clarksburg, where I was an ops manager. They said, "Would you build us a pump?" And we got to talking about it, and we ended up building them a pump. After that pump got built, the company got bought out, and I left. I decided that I didn't want to work for
Mhm.
someone else, and I left.
Sure.
So I come to talk to the guys in Odington just to let them know that I would be there for some support if they needed on the pump, and that kind of turned out to be an interview, and that was 28 years ago. I'm still here.
And you're still here.
I'm
And I
still
know you have,
here.
I know we worked in the past pretty frequently together, and I know you have a lot of stories to share. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to say. But Ken, I know you also started around the same time as John, also with jet grouting. Is that right?
Pretty close, Lauren. I guess as opposed to John, I came to Hayward Baker at the time as a
Hmm.
very green college student that just gotten his master's from NC State, and
Sure.
I had only heard of grouting because I had done my research in school for a company called Hayward Baker doing some
Hmm.
compact grouting research. I came in pretty green. I had never heard of jet grouting probably till about a year after I started uh,
Hmm.
with Hayward Baker. And I think that was 1997. And actually, John came out to that project because
Oh.
he had been the one that had pretty much developed the pump that was going to be used there. I think it was the first time on the West Coast that we were going to do double system jet grouting.
Hmm.
That was on the North Island Naval Air Station.
What did those early days for both of you look like when you first started? I mean, were you stressed? Was there a lot going on? Were you working for a lot of clients, different projects, traveling a lot? Just talk to me a little bit about what those early days look like.
The early days for me were very busy. I felt like a goose. I woke up in a new world every morning. We worked from Maine to California. There was a lot of jobs where we were so busy when we loaded the equipment, I would load the guys' pickup trucks on the same trucks and ship them across country, and we would fly out there the next week to start yet another project. In the early days, it was busy. People saw us as the problem solvers. I want to say, our engineers, as smart as they all were, they could figure out the client's problems and get a design done, give it to us in the field, and we would go build it. And I loved that. It was we've worked on a lot of unique structures across this United States.
Hmm.
It's been a real pleasure to me. It's been a real learning experience as well.
Yeah, John described it as busy, and that's definitely a good summary. I'd say the traveling we did back then was kind of a different level. I mean, we're all over
Hmm.
the place. I think I've heard John use the term "band of gypsies" before. That describes it very well. I mean, we were all, road warriors.
Sure.
And it was a lot of fun, though. I mean, when I came out of school, I was actually on a trip across the U.S., just kind of going from town to town, staying with various people,
Hmm.
living on the road at the time. And then I met up with Francis Gallardi, who was the guy that actually had sponsored my research in school. On my trip, and I'd mentioned to him that, hey, if anything ever surfaces, and you need a young geotechnical engineer for anything, let me know. I'll be finished up my trip soon enough. And
Hmm.
sure enough, he offered me a job probably 2 or 3 weeks after that, and my road trip continued for another 5 years or so, going from project to project, and it was a blast. I enjoyed the heck out of it. It was, I got to see things I never would have otherwise seen.
I know you have a pretty interesting background, Ken, though. You said you've worked in the Keller office in 5 different continents. Is that right?
Yeah, I've actually had a chance to kind of go all over the place. Obviously North America, and worked in South America as well as in Europe, Asia, and I've done a couple of tours down in Australia as well.
Did you have any favorites?
Working with the European guys is always great. I,
Hmm.
I get to learn so much from them.
Sure.
But as far as a favorite continent, in 2018, I had a chance to work for about 2.5, 3 months down just north of Sydney, Australia,
Hmm.
outside a town called Newcastle, Australia. They treated me well. They put me up in an apartment there that was probably 100 yards off the Pacific Ocean, and it was just the most beautiful coastline I've ever seen in my life.
Oh,
Uh,
that's great.
yeah, and it was just such a pleasant place to be. I had just left the East Coast, where we'd gone through about 30 days of freezing weather, and got there, and it was just absolutely beautiful. It was a tough job. It was long hours, and a
Hmm.
difficult project, but it was worth it. It was a great place to be.
And John, I know you do your fair share of traveling, or at least you did do your fair share of traveling too. What do you think that you have learned from just kind of being on the road and interacting with these different Keller employees, different areas of the country? I mean, how has that sort of impacted your career and maybe also your personal life?
I started out as a superintendent with Keller, and I was very fortunate that I got to work with a lot of the same drillers, the same grout mixers, the same pump operators. We kind of became a traveling family. I respected their home time. Guys that's got to get home to see their families. That's very important, and I respected that. The company respected that. But I was very fortunate to get to work with the same group of guys for several years, doing very extensive travel across the country, working on some really cool projects. And just working with that group of guys, we got to where when we got to a job site that morning at 7 o'clock and started unloading 6 to 7 truckloads of gear,
Hmm.
that everyone knew what they were doing. And by noon, or latest 1 o'clock, we were ready to do test columns. And I was very proud of that, for not for myself, but for the team that I had that could get that accomplishment done.
Sure.
So getting there on the first day and getting our test in so that George Burke or someone from engineering could come out and look at the cores and go, wow, let's go to work, boys. That was I was pretty proud of that.
And I know too, you do a lot of the training. I know that's where we've sort of worked closely together with the driller training school, the vibro school. I think it's great that you do that and just seeing you interact with these Keller employees and just watching them grow from maybe being really hesitant to running these drill rigs to just coming out on top and just being so confident in what they're doing. I mean, what does that mean to you to watch, this training happen? You kind of lead it and then you're seeing these employees start from being very hesitant and unsure to coming out super confident. I mean, what does that mean to you and how does that make you feel watching them grow like that?
Well, Lauren, I tell everybody that I love seeing the light come on. When somebody gets something, there's a change in their demeanor, their attitude. They ask tons more questions because now they have a good idea of what they're doing. So now they're asking the right questions. And it's good to see a guy start out as a candidate driller, and hey, you're only a candidate driller for 250 hours and you can be qualified after that point. I like to see that light come on in the guys' eyes and in their mind when they finally get it. They go, I got this, and I can do this, and I'm going to be the best at it I can be. The
Yeah.
training has taken me into some really cool places. I got to go to India I think back in 19 for 10 weeks, training a crew that none of them spoke the same dialect of the Indian language.
Hmm.
There was like 40 dialects, and we had tons of interpreters, and I was on the planning process for the first 3 to 4 weeks, and then on the job site for the next 5 to 6 weeks, and that was cool to see a job where they had never jetted before. At the end of the job, they were so successful. That to me is awesome. I like training.
Obviously, you were both talking a little bit about traveling earlier and how in those early days when you first started, that's all you were doing. You didn't really mind it. But how have you sort of seen the traveling change and just like the industry change alone in the past, 15 to 20 years?
I guess from my side, there's been, a lot of changes that have happened over the years. Kind of to the first part that you mentioned, the travel. Uh, my experience with travel was probably a little different than John's. He talked about, trying to get everybody home all the time. With going international a number of times, that home time was not quite as often. Company policy, I think, was every 3 weeks or as the project allowed. Uh,
Hmm.
we we tended to default more towards as the project allowed. Um, and understandably so, when people have got to, fly across the ocean, it just becomes
Sure.
more challenging. We had done a 6-month project. Oh gosh, I think it was back in 2000 in South Korea. And yeah, that was really tough to get people back and forth for home time for that. But I think nowadays it is more structured, like John was talking about, making sure people are getting home, respecting the home lives, trying to keep people out of trouble at their homes and, and married. I mean, I can remember some guys that where I think one of the drillers I knew was on his 8th marriage, way back when. And
Hmm.
obviously that's kind of the life of a gypsy there. But so yeah, I think that's changed a lot for the better. The other stuff that's changed a lot for the better, obviously safety. Safety's, on a whole different level now, and that's great to see.
Hmm.
Equipment's improved a lot too. I mean, going from all this, yeah, I'm sure John could talk more about it, but the drills we started off with, you dialed in the pull speeds and the rotation rates by just little hydraulic valves on the drill themselves. They weren't monitored and dialed in with electronics like they are nowadays. So the quality of product that you're actually able to produce is significantly better. On the downside of some of the changes that have happened, I think we've kind of become a little more bureaucratic as an industry. There's a lot more paper pushing going on, especially when it comes to public projects. And some of that's probably due to technology. All of a sudden now it's possible to send somebody, a 20,000 page set of contract documents where
Hmm.
before you might have gotten a fax that had one boring a foundation plan and a 1-page scope of work and asked to bid the job from that. So yeah, some of that has changed the amount of paperwork, and I think that can kind of stifle people to some degree
Hmm.
because there's so much to kind of dig through, and that probably prevents innovation to some degree. I think we need to look past that and understand why all that paperwork's there, and just kind of look past it and move on, and remember what this company was kind of built on, and that is
Hmm.
innovation and creativity, and the desire to always try to make things better and do a better job and be more efficient.
The only thing I would say that to add to what Ken was talking about is, back in the day when we would show up on a job site, normally they were either just getting started on a project, so we were the first ones there, or there was a severe problem on the job. They'd already started building the structure or the building or the dam or whatever it is we were working on, or the bridge. They would jump through the hoops to get us the space, the everything that we needed was at our beck and call, so we could get in, get going, fix their problem, and get out. Sometimes in today's world, it seems like some of the techniques has turned into a commodity. It sometimes when the cheapest guy gets it, well, we have to go back to fix it. Today's world is it's really about that dollar. That part kind of bothers me a little bit because I can remember so many sites where oh gosh, Haver Baker's here. Oh, let's give them all the space, get out of their way. What do you need? Get going, fix our problem.
Mhm.
I don't see as much of that in today's market as I've seen 15 years ago.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong there, John, but don't you remember back then? It seemed like we worked for contractors who actually did work more often, as opposed to maybe construction managers that are just issuing, contracts and kind of managing subcontractors.
100%, Ken.
Yeah, so I think that kind of it ties right in with what
Mhm.
John was saying. It's, a lot of the people we work for nowadays don't really understand what it's like to do work.
And do you think too those innovations along the way, I mean, I feel like we're always trying to see what the latest gadget or what the latest device or tool is in the industry. And, I feel like you need to kind of stay on top of that to really stay competitive to get the best work that's out there. So do you think, having Keller stay ahead of the game or try to come up with these innovative ways to, maybe shorten the time of our work or decrease the budget for a certain client? I mean, do you think that's a really good tool that we're using?
I would say definitely still seeing that. Maybe not as much as we used to, but we still are. And one of the
Mhm.
examples that comes to mind is one of the things that the soil mixing product team has been working on. And that is basically using additives to help reduce cement in the soil mixing process.
Mhm.
I mean, it's a great sustainability idea as well, but at the end of the day, it's saving us money,
Sure.
and has some great potential, to make us more competitive.
I've always viewed Keller as, well, we are the biggest, and I view us as the best. We've got a great team of engineers. We've got a great team of leadership guys, but more so, we have a great staff of field people. And
Mhm.
some of the best ideals that Keller does today came from guys that work in the field. Little things they came up with, a new gadget, a new widget, a new whatever you want to call it, a new way of doing something, some ways to do things safer, faster, easier. A
Mhm.
lot of those ideals has came from guys in the field, and I think that process is still fostered today. It keeps us ahead of the game.
Yeah, a couple of interesting examples of what John just said. Two come to mind right now. One modern day one is all the stuff that Jim Jones is doing with the rototilt. The uncoiler for the anchors, the shot
Mhm.
nozzle, the lagging cutters. A lot of great stuff he's come up with there. And then I think kind of go back old school, bottom feed tip over system that's used on cranes was put together on a bar nap by a couple of the mechanics out west, and Francis Gallardi and one of the superintendents out there. And then, it was taken from there and basically engineered. And now to this day, it's what we still use.
I am a supervisor at Keller. Um, been here for well over 9 years. Great company. They take care of you, treat you well. Never thought I would be here, and they gave me the opportunity to progress and move up and become the person I am today. As I started as a supervisor at the age of 27 years old, and they gave me that opportunity. So now I show my ethics on learning every day, all day.
I know that you've both been with the company for a good amount of time. I'm sure you've worked with so many different people across all different regions. Mentors that come to mind, whether you're a mentor to this employee, this person, or if someone has been a mentor to you, just speak a little bit about what that looks like.
Well, I've had some great mentors in my career at Keller, starting out with guys like Bob Rubright, George Grisham, George Burke. All of those guys were very high in the food chain, presidents, vice president of engineering. I got to work with George Burke a lot on jet grouting projects where we were developing new stuff like check valves and monitors and new different systems. And just lots of things we were trying out. When we went from batch mixing to jet valve mixing, George says, "What's this all about?" And so we jumped into it. And now we jet mix all across the country all the time, every day. Other mentors I've had that mentored me, I think they didn't know they probably were sometimes, but they were.
Sure.
Was Mike Cura, a longtime Hayward Baker and now Keller superintendent. Eric Droth, the president of the company. He started out as a field engineer, and now he's the president. So I've done a lot of work with Eric in the past, a lot of projects, and they were good ones. So it's, if your eyes are open and your ears are open, you can always pick up stuff from these guys that's been around. And something that my wife always said was, George Grisham, George Burke, and Bob Rewright were always gentlemen, and they treated us as gentlemen in the field.
Yeah, plenty of people over the years. A couple that John mentioned, the first being George Burke.
Mm-hmm.
For those who aren't aware, George is, I refer to him as the pioneer of jet grouting in North America. I mean, he essentially was one of the first to perform jet grouting in North America. I think Halliburton was actually the first, but they backed out very quickly, and pretty much developed the market. And I remember as a young field engineer on that jet grouting job I had mentioned in the beginning, North Island Naval Air Station, his knowledge of all the parameters and how changing one parameter affects all the other parameters, which affects the end product. And I mean, he just was scrambling my brain with all the knowledge he had. And I think now I'm starting to finally understand it after all these years. But yeah, it was just great to work with him. And he was also very huge in the development of soil mixing as well. I mean, probably not quite as much as jet grouting, but yeah, he really helped pioneer that within Keller as well. John also mentioned Bob Rubright. To me, he was just an impressive leader. I remember, again, when I was a field engineer, he would come out to California on a quarterly basis to kind of visit with the team out there. And he would make, specific effort to come see me, this, young field engineer, sit down with me for 30 minutes and talk about what I was working on, and, hear about how things were going, what I thought was good, what I thought was bad. And that just always impressed me. And, just hearing him address everyone at the project managers meetings as well, just made me realize what a caliber person he was, or still is, I'm sure. So, and then another that John did not mention was Francis Gallardi. He was the guy that actually hired me out in California. And Francis was either the second or third person that Wally Baker had hired to start Hayward Baker back in the early 70s. Francis was an engineer, but he was just very mechanically minded and could build almost anything. And, it just was always thinking of how to do things, bigger, better, faster, cheaper. And he was also one of the hardest working people I'd ever met too. He had a reputation of hosting what they had called Frankathons, which he went by the name Frank for a while. And it was industry wide. People knew about the Frankathons, where people would just go work shifts that seemed to never end. Probably would be frowned upon by safety nowadays.
Right.
But I mean, he was just, he had so much energy and so much enthusiasm, and he was a tough guy too. I mean, he did not hold back any punches when he felt a certain way. Yeah, it might be about how you were working on something, or how the client was treating him, or but yeah, he was a great individual to kind of start up under. And he also taught me about the importance of money. It is a topic that probably, can be a little bit sensitive now as far as businesses making money. But, he was very clear. If the business does not make money, the show does not go on. We need to be, making a profit at the end of the day. And yeah, that was an important lesson to learn. Then one other person that kind of just popped into my mind as far as kind of my growth as a younger field engineer was one of our superintendents we had, and he has since passed, but his name was Tim Pollock. And he was the definition of kind of a hardcore superintendent. He was, hard charging, would not be afraid to yell at you, not one bit. And the first couple of months working under him, were pretty brutal, and I thought I was going to quit. But after he realized that I wasn't going to quit, that's when he kind of became a friend and a mentor. And, he'd show me how to operate a crane, and he'd show me how to weld, and, like all these other things. And kind of expressing the interest in that really kind of made him want to show me more. And,
Sure.
you know, he taught me quite a bit, and I probably wouldn't have thought of him as a mentor until John just brought up some of the other guys there.
And I imagine too that that's probably one of the reasons that both of you have maybe stayed at Keller for as long as you have. Would you think that's, probably accurate to say?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, just working under people like that made you want to stay, and it made a lot of people want to stay. I mean, over the years, there have been many long-term Keller employees.
Well, I do want to ask you one last hard-hitting question. I know you have traveled all over the place. You've seen a lot, you've done a lot. You probably have so many funny stories to share, so many favorite projects that you've worked on. So, I would love to hear if there was one project that maybe stands out to you or any funny moments that have happened along your career.
Probably one of my favorite projects that I've ever done in my career. There's a couple, but there's one standout was the Elliott Bay seawall. I went out there not really knowing what I was getting into. It was a very large project that actually Ken bid it, and I volunteered to be the lead superintendent on it.
Mhm.
And it started out with just a couple of rigs, day and night shift. It was 24 hours, day and night shift, smaller crews, 25 people or so. Office in downtown Seattle. That portion of the work went well. And then we got started into season 2. The job overall was about 2 years long. We got started into season 2, and all of a sudden we had 8 rigs out there, 3 batch plants, over 100 employees. We were bringing in 30 to 35 tanker loads of cement in a 24-hour period. It was taking us an hour to blow off a truck, or over an hour, so that math doesn't work. We had to figure that out.
Mhm.
We was hauling away 100 tanker loads of spoil a day. It was a very intense project, but the thing I like about that project is I work with some really good Keller superintendents. One of them now has passed. Got to train a couple of other superintendents that are still Keller employees. Trained some foremans. We had a very large crew, and it was actually, by the time the job ended, it was a very stressful job. It was for a very stressed client. That job made me grow a lot. It made me figure out a few things about just how work gets done. The one thing I remember, kind of a funny story, is I called Ken when we first drilled our first few jet grout columns in like May of 2014, and I says, "Oh, Ken, I got right down the bottom of these columns. We jetted them, we put in our test columns. We don't need to pre-drill. Don't worry about that. We'll save that money." Well, when we started season 2, we had 2 drill rigs out there, 2 pre-drill rigs out there drilling in front of our rigs because we couldn't get down anymore. So I know that Ken always wanted to say, "I told you so," but he never did. He never said that.
Doesn't mean I
But
didn't think it.
that's right. I ate my crow. We got our pre-drill rigs, and we moved on, and production increased by probably 35%.
Mhm.
So it was good to see by the end of the project, all the crew had came together, and we had a lot of union employees that they had never seen jet grouting before we started that job in 14. And by the end of 15, they were journeymen. They knew what they were doing. So it was a really good project that I enjoyed. I was glad to see it end, but it was a good project.
Yeah, that's really cool. And now, Ken, you can tell him, go ahead. You can tell him you told him so.
Yeah. Yeah. He told me.
Uh,
He told me.
John did an amazing job on that project. I mean, you put a bid together and you kind of have some thoughts in your head, but yeah, I mean, the way he assembled everything there and made it happen. And I mean, heck, that's probably one of his biggest teaching endeavors ever, was taking those people that had never seen jet grouting and,
Sure.
made them into some experts in a matter of months. I think kind of just like John, the one that sticks in my memory the most is probably one of the biggest challenges.
Mhm.
That was the job in South Korea. It was, I guess, right around 2000. It was just before monsoon season in 2000. So I think that was towards the like May timeframe. It was a compaction grouting job of an earth embankment dam, and we had set out to try to sonic drill to install our grout pipes. And we were having all sorts of problems. The sonic drills that we had bought didn't work right, and we had to bring a subcontractor in from the U.S., and that didn't work right. And we eventually got it figured out. It was a big learning lesson, but
Mhm.
there were some real things that just stuck in my mind from that project. And one was the Korean people and just how kind those people were. Uh, where the project was in a small little farming community. I think it was roughly a population of 600. And it was, the town was called Unmunmyeon, and it was in between Taegu and Busan, if you're
Mhm.
at all familiar with the geography, kind of on the southern end of South Korea. The people there, I mean, we came into town, and within 20 minutes of us moving into our office, the neighbors came over with food and drink and just kind of brought it over to greet us.
Oh, wow.
And I'm just thinking, wow, if this happened in the US, that surely wasn't going to happen.
Right.
And then, we kind of stuck out like a sore thumb. I mean,
Mhm.
I was there, and I'm considered tall in that part, and I'm not very tall. And some of the guys I was over there with, yeah, two of them specifically, Frank Collada and Dale Bame, they pretty much look like they just got off the back of a Harley Davidson, and probably Frank had. Um, but we did not look like we belonged there, and the adults were obviously very cultured and didn't say anything, but the kids, are being as honest as little kids are. We'd walk by and they just point at us and put their hand over their mouth and kind of gasp and giggle to each other. And we just thought it was hilarious. We thought we were celebrities in the town.
Right.
And the funny part about it is the owner was somewhat cautious about this whole operation because, a sinkhole in the dam, they didn't want, rumors to spread around the public. So
Mhm.
he told us to make sure we don't tell anybody what we're doing there. And, as I said, we stuck out like a sore thumb, but luckily
Sure.
none of us spoke Korean. So, but yeah, that was a very interesting project. And it was like John's project. It was a 24-hour a day, 6-day a week operation. So we were
Mhm.
pretty much always working.
Yeah.
But I did actually get a chance to get in a little exercise on Sundays. And I remember I'd go running, and there's really only one street in the town. So that gets old running up and down that. So occasionally I'd kind of take a little diversion and go through some of the farms. And one time I'm running through this one farm and I come upon somebody's house, and there's a bunch of, Korean folks on their back porch, probably having, dinner or drinks or something like that in the late afternoon. And all of a sudden they just start jumping up and down, cheering for me. It kind of felt like I was Rocky or something going through their fields.
Like, this is awesome. I wish I got this every time I ran.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you one last hard-hitting question to end our episode today. If you had to describe your experience at Keller so far, what is one word that you would use to describe it?
I'd probably go with ever changing.
Very good. I like that. John, what about you?
I'd go with awesome.
I like it. Ever changing and awesome. Perfect. Well, we will end it right there. And I do really appreciate you joining us today. It was great to really dive into your careers to see what you've done at Keller and just how you've really progressed and just what the early days look like leading up until right now. So, John and Ken, thank you again for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Lauren. It's been a blast.
Yep. Thank you, Lauren.
And that about wraps it up for our show today. Thank you so much for listening. We hope you were able to learn a little bit more about the people who make our company so great. And as always, make sure to follow us on social media on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And you can always visit our website for more information at www.geotechnical.com. www.keller-na.com.